So I'm Ginny Stimpson, the chair of the Neighborhoods Committee, and I welcome you this evening. Sue Lynch, who's just joined us, was the person who helped organize this program. She knows our presenter tonight, Cathy Wickwire, and did some good work on finding out about coming here. The thinking of the Neighborhoods Committee was that this Stimson-Green Mansion is one we walk by so often. If we're walking to the QFC, say, we notice those bears in the park by that bench. And this is the lovely mansion that's right next to that. So it's a familiar place to us, but there's so many stairs within the building. We thought for people who can't make those stairs these days, it would be a real advantage to do this by Zoom. So you could hear something about the history and see the interior. But I want to tell you that on Wednesday, August 10th, we'll meet in the lobby here. We'll put this announcement in the alert, but we'll meet in the lobby here. And anybody who does feel like they would like to walk up there and go on a tour can meet Cathy, and she'll give us a personal tour inside. So we're offering it both ways, where you can save your joints by doing it this way, or you could get some step points by going up there to the mansion. Every second Tuesday from 1 to 2:30, they do public tours up there. So that's another option for people. But this way we're getting our own personal version, and we thank you for that. The Neighborhoods Committee acknowledges that we're gathering on Indigenous land, that both our building and the Stimson-Green Mansion are on territories of the Coast Salish peoples, specifically the Duwamish, the first people of Seattle, the stewards of this land, past, present, and future. So as neighborhoods people, we're well aware of a history of this land over time. And we're fortunate that Cathy Wickwire is here with us tonight to give us some specific history about this mansion. Cathy is the operations manager. And what that translates to mean is that she oversees the day-to-day operation of the Washington Trust for Historic Preservation and the Stimson-Green Mansion. She manages the organization's financial activities and human resource issues, and serves as an in-house docent for guided tours. So now she's an in-house and out-house docent. Cathy's a native Washingtonian, and she's well known to several people here at Horizon House, two of them, Mary Kinney and Sue Lynch, who are with us. She's also a good friend of Charlene Hutchings on our staff. Cathy has deep roots that go back several generations on both sides of her family. She was born in Spokane. She spent most of her life in Seattle, except she went to college at Walla Walla to Whitman College. And she went to grad school at Boston University, where she received a Master's of Arts in Preservation Studies. So, Cathy, we thank you very much for being flexible, for coming over and having lunch with Sue and me and planning this, and for being willing to meet the needs of us at Horizon House. So thank you for that.
Well, thank you for that nice introduction. I have to admit, this is my first virtual tour on Zoom, so hopefully there will be no glitches. I've done this tour in person. Haven't done it have I done it? No, I don't think I've done it at Horizon House. So, but the nice thing about doing the tour virtually or on the screen and not in person, in addition to not having to take the stairs, is that I can show you photographs, historic photographs and other images that might not be, I might not be able to show if you were in person. But I do encourage you to join the tour on the 10th and or any of the other times that we have public tours here at the Stimson-Green Mansion. As Ginny mentioned, I work for the Washington Trust for Historic Preservation. We are a statewide nonprofit members organization, and we work to preserve historic buildings around the state of Washington. We're based here in Seattle, but we have staff that is all over the state, and we operate all over the state. We've been the proud owners of the Stimson-Green Mansion since 2001. So we kind of had a quiet 20th anniversary last year. We'll jump right in. You've been looking at this beautiful view. I should mention that many of the images in this slideshow were taken by a resident of the apartment building across the street that's now condos, Sutton Place, Nathan Tane. So you can appreciate his beautiful images of the Stimson-Green Mansion. Starting right off, I think it's kind of fun to see this aerial view. This was one that we know somebody took this, was over in the First Hill Plaza, and they took a picture that zoomed in on the Stimson-Green Mansion. It kind of gives you an idea of the scale of the building, something that might not be as visible from the street and from the front. It really is quite a large building. It's about a 14,000 square foot building with about a 2,500 square foot detached carriage house, which is kind of a fancy word for a garage. You can get a good view of our roof. If all goes well, we will be replacing that roof next summer. So it's currently it's currently fine, but it's ending its useful life. Looking again at another view of the Stimson-Green Mansion, you'll see that it is designed in what's called the Tudor Revival style of architecture. So that's that half timbering you see in the upper part of the house. We have diamond pane windows. We have a brick first story, and then we have the stuccoed second story. Our carriage house is designed in the same style. Of course, this picture was taken before we removed the trees a couple years ago and did some work on the property. But you can see that the architect designed it to match, at least on the exterior. The interior is much more simply detailed, and certainly not nearly as detailed as the mansion itself. The building was designed by a Spokane architect named Kirtland Cutter, and here we see a photograph of him. And in designing the Stimson-Green Mansion, he used the plans for a house that he had designed in Spokane the year before. He's a Spokane architect, and this was his first commission in Seattle. And if you look at this house, we don't have time to go into it, but it is kind of our older sibling. It's very similarly detailed as the Stimson-Green Mansion. It's in the Browns Addition neighborhood of Spokane. So it's on a bigger lot and set further back. So it doesn't have, it's a lot easier for you to get into. It doesn't have the steps to get into it. And it's spread out a little bit more than our building is. But if you look at it, there's a lot of that similar detail. And the layout of the inside is similarly detailed as well. The architect was an interesting person. He was really served as what we would consider an architect, interior designer, and interior decorator, in that he picked out, not only designed the building, designed the interior spaces, but picked out all the furniture and furnishings and fabrics and everything in the building. Oh, you know, there's a reflection off the building across the street, so that's why there's a bright sun on me right now. The building was built between 1899 and 1901 for Charles and Harriet Stimson. And these are images of two portraits that we have of the Stimpsons down in the library. So if you've been to the house, you may have seen these portraits. Charles and Harriet came to the Northwest in the mid-1880s. They had met and married in Michigan, although Harriet was originally from Long Island. And they came out here in the mid-1880s for the lumbering interests that we have out here. Mr. Stimpson's father, Thomas D. Stimpson, pictured in this portrait, and this is another portrait we have here at the mansion. He came from fairly modest beginnings, born in Canada, lived in Michigan, moved to Chicago, was a developer in Chicago, and actually ended up being a developer in Los Angeles, and was one of the wealthiest men in Los Angeles. But he sent two sons to the Northwest in the mid-1880s, Frederick and Charles. The Stimpsons had two children, Tom and Dorothy. Tom was about 16 when the family moved in, and Dorothy was about 8 years old. We don't really hear as much about Tom because, unfortunately, he died in 1931 in a plane crash. This was 2 years after his father died in 1929. And so we don't hear quite as much about him. Dorothy, this was her childhood home. We've heard a lot more about her because in 1918, she married A. Scott Bullitt and became Dorothy Stimson Bullitt. And here are two of the portraits we have of her at the Stimson-Green Mansion. The first one done in 1924 that was done by an artist named Neil Ordain. And this was her as a mother of 3 children. And then the portrait, the other portrait was done later in her life by a Los Angeles portrait painter named Meg Sargent. And this was hung in the lobby of King Broadcasting. Dorothy thought she'd have a life as a wife and a mother and maybe a political powerhouse because her husband was heavily involved in Democratic politics. But sadly, her husband died in 1932 of liver cancer shortly before he was good friends with Franklin Roosevelt, and it was shortly before he was to introduce Franklin Roosevelt at the Democratic National Convention that he passed away. And so Dorothy's life changed completely. She had to be a woman of business, taking over her family's real estate ventures in downtown Seattle and elsewhere, and then using that as a springboard for founding King Broadcasting in the late 1940s. So she's very well known for her business acumen, and after her death, the business sold for $500 million, which is some couple $2 billion in today's terms. So there's many more stories I could tell you about Dorothy, but she basically had the run of the house, the run of the neighborhood, really the run of the city, because initially she had a pony and cart, then she had a horse and cart, and then her parents got her a car when she turned 12 years old, and so she could drive all over the city. And really the only rule was that if there was a horse coming, you had to pull over so that you didn't spook the horses. Dorothy had 3 children, and these were portraits that were done at the same time as the earlier portrait of Dorothy. Her first born was Stimpson. His name was actually Charles Stimson Bullitt, but he always went by Stimson or Stim Bullitt. He was born in 1919, lived to almost 90 years old, died in 2009. Patsy in the center, she was born in 1920, passed away in 2003. And then Harriet, the youngest, was born in 1924, and she just passed away earlier this year at the age of 97. I love these portraits because they really capture each of the children and their personalities. You look at Stimpson, he is, as he was in his adult life, a very kind and gentle person, but somewhat aloof and shy. Patsy's looking right at you. She's very direct. And then, of course, Harriet is the beauty. She's the dreamer. And so I love the way that the artist has captured these 3. The Stimpsons lived in the house for only about 15 years before moving to the Highlands, which is a private gated community located now just outside our city limits, north of 145th at the water, but at the time was well outside the city limits. Not long after they moved into the mansion in 1900, Mr. Stimson started developing the Highlands, and so they moved out in 1915. And it was at that time that Joshua Green and his family moved into the house. They lived a few blocks over on Boylston Street in a house. Here we have a portrait of Mr. Green as a younger man and as a elder statesman of the city of Seattle. He and his wife Laura lived in the mansion from 1915 until 1975. It was early January of 1975 that Mrs. Green passed away at the age of 101, and Mr. Green died 3 weeks later at the age of 105. And at that point, they had been married for 73 years after getting married in 1901 with this portrait. They had 3 children, Bentonia, Francis, and Joshua Jr. And very often the 2 sisters lived in the house with their families at one time or the other. So it really was a family home for much of its history. We're grateful that Mr. Green lived here. We're grateful that he was a wealthy man, so he wasn't swayed by offers to sell the house. And we're grateful that he was a frugal man because he really didn't make that many changes to the mansion during his time here. We don't have portraits of Mr. Green in the mansion, but these are portraits of his parents, William Henry Harrison Green and Bentonia Johnston Green. And these were painted in 1908. and hung in the mansion in 1915 when they moved in, and have been here ever since. When the Greens passed away, nobody wanted to live in the house. None of the family members wanted it. And they actually didn't want a lot of the items in the house, kind of the bigger things that maybe wouldn't be anybody's taste in the 1970s. So fortunately, the house was purchased at a significant discount by Historic Seattle, the city's historic preservation organization. And they did make some upgrades at the time and put city landmark and National Register status on it to protect it, but then sold it to other individuals. A couple different owners between 1975 and 1986, and that was when Patsy Bullock Collins purchased the house. Again, her grandparents built the house. Her mother had lived there as a child, and she was wanting to purchase it just to make sure that it was properly preserved. And she was the one that really did a significant upgrade of the interior and the systems of wiring and plumbing and the like, to make it a special event facility, but also to make sure that it would stay standing. And it was Patsy Collins who donated the mansion to the Washington Trust in 2001. So she was our benefactor, as well as being a benefactor of a number of other organizations. She was the one that funded the Garden of Remembrance outside of Benaroya Hall. So we're lucky for her generosity. We also had some more unusual inhabitants of the house. And Gini was talking about the statue in the park that was put in a couple years ago when they redid the park. These are the bears that those statues are commemorating. This is Johnny and Irish. They were two bear cubs that were orphaned in the woods where Mr. Stimpson had his lumbering operations. The foreman found the bears after their mother had been killed by a falling tree and wondered what to do with them. He brought them to the Stimpson house, and that was when Dorothy says, "We'll take them as pets." And so they lived out on the flat porch outside of her bedroom. This is the roof above the porte cochere. And at the time, it had a railing around it. So it was like a giant cage for them. And you can see the one bear sunning itself. And she would take it on walks in the neighborhood. And she tells stories in her biography. Stories are told in her biography, which is called An Uncommon Life by Delphine Haley, about how she would come home and they would literally tear her dress to shreds because they were so excited to see her. And if she took them on walks, they were kind of rascally, and they would run up telephone poles and utility poles. They were only here for about a year, and they got too big, and they were taken to Woodland Park Zoo to live out their life. Although she did visit them with her children in their later years, and she always thought her bears recognized her. Well, many of you may recognize this view of First Hill for its the cathedral, St. James Cathedral, at the top of the hill. Although you can see it with the dome that used to be on top of it until it collapsed in the Great Snowstorm of 1916. But what you can see with First Hill is that its height, for one. It's 366 feet above Elliott Bay. And then you can also see that there's really an eclectic mix of homes. Up here on top of the hill, it was some of these larger homes, and they think there was as many as 40 of these larger homes, 4 of which remain right now. But it really was a lot of lower, middle, and upper income residents that were mixed in, much of like it is today. Many of the blocks were split up into quarter block lots. And so as the 20th century wore on, it became quite easy to redevelop the neighborhood. But basically what you're seeing in this picture through the middle is where Interstate 5 is now. So I guess Horizon House would be off on the left, a little bit on the far left there. This might be a house that you'll recognize. It is still in existence on the right. That is the 1902 W.D. Hophius House, which has been the residence of the Catholic Archbishop since 1920, although as I understand it, the Archbishop may not actually live there anymore. But it shows Boren Street back in the day when it was much more quiet and residential. You're looking from the corner of Boren and Spring Street north to Boren and Seneca Streets. And you can see there's wide planting strips. There were trees. Of course, none of that's there, but the Hophius House, the brick house on the right with the it's kind of a Venetian style terracotta porch that it has. And so this just gives you a sense of this residential neighborhood. A little bit further away at the corner of Summit Avenue and Marion Street, other large homes, and these are all postcard views. It was so popular that they took postcard pictures of it and sold them. You wouldn't be able to see this today. This is pretty much smack dab right in the middle of where Swedish Hospital is right now. So, but it gives you a sense of these larger homes that were in the neighborhood. And it was really a mix of styles that were up here. They were Queen Anne revival, they were Tudor revival, and there were many Victorian homes as well. And of course, this is a postcard view of our very own Stimson-Green Mansion. This is from the corner of Minor and Seneca looking northeast. So we have the mansion on the left there. It looks like there was quite a bit of ivy growing on the building at the time. And then again, it's a narrower street with generous planting strips, and it just gives you a sense of a really quiet residential neighborhood that didn't really last too much longer. In this image, we see the elevation plan that the architect drew for the building. It's amazing how back in the day that you basically, there's one of these images, an elevation for each side of the building. There's a floor plan for each floor. And then there's a section showing how the walls connected to each other and how each floor connected. But the plans are not very much more detailed than this. And you think about today when they're specifying everything down to the last, inch. But you get a sense that the building was really built pretty much exactly as it was designed. And again, that Tudor revival style where you have the diamond pane windows and the half timbering and the stucco on the second floor above the brick first floor. Not as noticeable are the sandstone sills that you see above the windows at the basement level and around the porch. If you look at this photograph shortly after the house was built, you'll notice that the trees that were initially planted in front of the house, you'll see that behind where we have the Cascade Court apartment buildings now, there were other houses there, of course. One thing you really will notice is that the porte cochere is not there. There's what we call the veranda, the covered porch, is only accessible from the inside of the building. Initially, they would have their horses and carriages drive up to the front of the building, and then they'd come and go. But when they got cars, they realized that they needed to be able to, they wanted to be able to, drive in to the carriage house, and then also, of course, with our weather here, be able to come and go from the car without getting wet in the wetter months. You'll see here the trees have gotten significantly larger. Of course, sadly, none of these trees remain. We have had to take down all our maple trees, and so we don't have those anymore. But you also see here at one time there was a small tennis court or some other kind of court at the front of the house. Although I think that was fairly short-lived. Over the years, in addition to the porte cochere, there were bathrooms added. There were other things that were altered in the building, and typically every time they would hire the same architect, Kirtland Cutter, to do that work. The carriage house was originally smaller, and you can see that it's more symmetrical in terms of having it be the center entrance and each end. But again, when they got cars, they needed more room, especially when Dorothy had her own car. So they added on to the south end of the building. And you do get a sense of that in this photograph from around 1911, which we can tell by the license plate on the car. But you can see that they've extended the building to the south to be able to accommodate more cars. The building has always had a caretaker's or apartment on the second floor, which was typically used by the chauffeur for his residence. And they always had a chauffeur. The families always had a chauffeur, even though Charles D. Stimpson loved to drive. And on the very far left of the image, the man smoking the cigar is Charles Stimpson himself. You may notice that his sleeve is somewhat loose, and that's because he lost his lower right arm as a young boy in a swimming accident, but that didn't stop him from driving or golfing or really doing anything in life. So we see here, this is a plan of the first floor, and these are where all the public rooms are located. You come up the front steps to the porch. You enter into a hallway. On your left is the reception room or ladies' parlor. On the right is the library, which was really a multi-function space. There's more steps up to what they call the stair hall that has the stairs to the second floor, and then leads to the dining room straight ahead. That covered porch on the far left is the veranda. And we can see that while those are the public spaces, in the upper left corner, we have the servant spaces. And so there's the kitchen, the servants' hall, and the servants' dining room. There's also stairs that go down to the basement and up to the second floor that are in the back of the house. So there's the front of house stairs for the family and their guests. And then there's the back of house stairs for the servants to use to move through the house. So here we are at the front door looking in. As I mentioned, we have Tudor Revival on the outside, but on the inside, for want of a better word, it's eclectic. And this is a style of architecture. The idea is to go from room to room and go through architectural history. The architect loved employing this style because he loved rich detail. He would use quarter-sawn oak woodwork to tie it all together, and other rich detail in his work. So we have this Gothic pointed arch doorway that leads into this hallway. Here's a photograph of the room shortly after the house was built, and you can get a sense of some of their furnishings. One thing they like to have are these portieres or drapery that were hanging in the entryways. But you also see where the architect liked to create views through the space. Carpets on the floors, rich detailing, furniture with rich fabrics and coverings. And of course, here is the room today. We don't have quite as many rugs around the house, but we still do have those stairs. And you can see that the ceiling is much as it was originally. And this is something the architect liked to do. He liked to take a simple fabric and then embellish it. And in this case, it's a burlap or canvas that has been stenciled and painted and gilded to have this rich detail. And the feeling is when you walk in the house, you're supposed to go, wow. And then you see this view through this arched opening into the dining room. And it kind of makes it seem like a larger space because it does have those stairs. And here's a closer view of the ceiling and then some of the original fixtures that are in the house. To the left is the reception room or ladies' parlor. And this is a room that, this is a photograph of the room, again, shortly after it was built. It's done in the French neoclassical style. This is the one room that did have changes made with the greens. You'll see in this picture that there's fabric wall coverings in each of the panels. There's kind of a candelabra sconce, a mirror that's maybe half of the height above the fireplace. And then the ceiling. In this photograph from today, you'll see that in moving in, the greens really kind of made it even more fabulous. They added moldings around they took off the fabric panels and added moldings and plaques and really made it even much more neoclassical with imagery of ancient Greece and Rome. And of course, this is where Mrs. Stimpson would entertain her lady friends. The convention at the time was different neighborhoods the ladies of those neighborhoods would be home a certain afternoon. And for First Hill, that was Thursday afternoon. So all the women of First Hill would stay at their houses, and then their friends would know that they could drop by and visit and didn't even have to call ahead for that. Turning to the right as you come into the doorway, this is the library. And the floor was covered by a great carpet. We're not sure where that ended up, but it must have been a monster because it's a very large space. They had tables and chairs in here. And this was a formal living room, but it also really served as a multifunction space. They did a lot of entertaining in here. They had a piano up on the left, the raised dais, and they did a lot of business entertaining at home, and then also family events as well. You get a little bit bigger sense of how big the space is in this view. And then you can see on the left and the right, the portraits that I showed you earlier of Dorothy Stimson Bullitt and Mr. Green's parents, and of course, Charles and Harriet Stimpson. In this room, we see a real mix of styles. We have a box ceiling, we have this fireplace with dragon andirons and carved lions on either side, but then we have classical columns, and we have also the Gothic pointed arch details. Here's another view of that space. You can see the portraits of the Stimpsons there, and I get a little bit more of a close-up of those lions and the dragon andirons. Our fireplaces are no longer wood burning, but we have converted 3 of them for gas use. So we can turn on the fireplaces, and it's kind of nice on a cold day when we have staff meetings in the dining room to turn on the fireplace. Here's a view from, just to orient you, from in front of the fireplaces, looking towards that ladies' parlor. So you can see the bookcases as kind of essentially why they call it the library, because they do have these bookcases, but looking in from the library into the ladies' parlor, you do get that sense of the space. And here's the piano on the dais here, where the family would have had musicians to entertain their friends and their guests. Looking to the dining room, we see that, and it's a little bit different style, although that I had a lot of heavy drapery in the space. And here it is today. You get a nicer view of it. Largely the same, although this dining room table belonged to the Greens. It seats 18 with 16 side chairs and 2 end chairs and a buffet. But you can really see some of the beautiful detail of the space. The woodwork in here is sycamore. So it's done in a lighter, more buttery color. The ceiling has this coffering. It's an English Renaissance style. And really what is the focal point of the room, the fireplace has this beautiful blue glass tile that was imported from Italy. And then above the fireplace and then encircling the room is a mural that's painted on corduroy to simulate a tapestry. And the imagery is of a king and his castle and plenty. And we know that both families did quite a bit of entertaining in this space. And when you have special events at the mansion, this is very typically, we do more buffet meals than sit-down dinners, although we can do about 50 people for a sit-down dinner in the library, but this is where the buffet is laid out. So if you've been here for an event, you might remember that. Here is a close-up of that fireplace and those glass tiles. And then again, you can see the painted corduroy that encircles the room above the fireplace. Again, all the original light fixtures in the space. The building was built to be both dual gas and electric, but they really only primarily use the electric. Although, as we understand it, a lot of the gas fixtures remained active into the 1980s, which is sort of scary to think about that. Again, here's a much more closer look. You can see really the texture of that corduroy, and the idea was that it would look kind of like a medieval tapestry. There's been a few touch-ups since it was painted, but it's really largely the same, and we're grateful to have it still. The ladies had their parlor on the first floor, and then the men had their smoking room or Turkish room in the basement, accessed by a long flight of stairs. In the stairwell is the safe for the house. It looks more fancy than it actually is. It has this imposing door, and then you open it and there's a double door on the inside, and then it looks like a little closet in there. It's interesting, when we had the house donated to us in 2001, we didn't have the combination to the safe. We knew nothing was in there. And it was a guest at a wedding that cracked it. And it turned out to be quite easy. He was trying to entertain his young son, and finally asked, "What's the address here?" and started playing with the numbers of 1204 and discovered that it was 402197. So we do have the safe, and it has been used we've had a couple murder mystery dinners, that kind of thing, and events, and they've used the safe for that purpose. Coming down to the Turkish room, this is what it would have looked like in Mr. Stimpson's day again. And it's very cozy and clubby with chairs and tables, and they could go down there, and it was a very popular thing at the time to design it in a vaguely Middle Eastern style. We don't really have much of that. We don't really have any of that furniture left, although there's a cabinet in the corner below the window that we do have. But you can see that this photograph gives you a better idea of the design of the space. The bottle glass windows, if you've ever been to Spain, this is typical of Moorish architecture, was where I'd seen it, and some of the other details in here. That bench probably was in this room. We just don't know well enough from the photographs. But of course, the men could come down here and get away. They had their own entrance to this space. And in an adjoining room, they had their own billiard table. So they could come down here and play pool and talk about the news of the day and smoke their cigars. Funny story, the architect originally planned to have a wine cellar at the bottom of those stairs so that, I guess, if you'd be impressed when you came down the stairs. Mr. Stimpson was asking, well, where's the bathroom? And they said, well, that's up on the first floor. And he said, no, I need a bathroom down here. So that's how we have a bathroom on the basement level as well. You can see in here that the wallpaper is a Native American, kind of more Southwest Navajo style, but it's the only kind of vaguely American style in the house. This is a decoration for the holidays once when we took this photograph, but going upstairs, we still see the oak woodwork, so we know that we're still in the public spaces. That door that's behind the newel post is the door that goes down to the Turkish room. There is a nice big landing between the first and second floors. And again, Dorothy would tell stories about how she liked when her parents would have parties, she likes to sit here and look at things. Although it is intended to be, it would have been intended to be a part of the public spaces. And then if you look out the windows there, that's that porch where the bears lived, where there was a railing around it. And Dorothy's room was off to the left, and she could take her bears in and out of there. On the second floor, there's 5 bedrooms. Originally, there were 6 bedrooms. There were 2 bedrooms that were combined into a single large room. Those bedrooms were occupied by the Stimpson son, Tom, and his cousin, Cully, but they weren't around too long, so they made it in one large room. This is the master bedroom of the house. Originally, the design was to be a master suite where they'd have a bedroom, a bathroom, and a sitting room. But because Dorothy was only 8 when they moved in, what should have been their sitting room became her bedroom. We have this room set up with furniture that's from the 2 families. This is Mrs. Stimpson's mother, Mrs. Overton's bedroom set here. We do have photographs of this piece of furniture from when she lived with the family when they moved in here. And this is the room that was Dorothy's room that should have been a sitting room that we turned back into a sitting room about 10 years ago. You see the door that goes into the bathroom. Initially, she shared the bathroom with her parents, but when she became a teenager, they added on. It was originally a window, so when those bears lived in the house, that's how she got them in and out of that porch. The furniture in here, the couch was Mr. Green's couch. The chair was a Stimpson chair. It's just a real mix of furniture from the 2 families that lived here. Back down to the first floor, this is the veranda porch, and as you can see, it's a nice open porch with a porch swing. We have just taken down the porch swing because we realized there's a lot more space without it in there, but this is the porch that originally would have been only accessible from the inside, but then they built on stairs and the covered drive to be able to come and go much more easily from their cars. Looking to the back of the house, again, this is on the first floor. You see through the doorway, the hallway where, it's fancy and nice. And then this is the servants' hall. On the left, the shorter open door is the dumbwaiter. The middle is a broom closet. And then on the far right is the annunciator or call box for the house. And here's a close-up of it. This is the modern conveniences of 1900. You see that over the years, things had changed. So you had Mrs. Green's room, Mr. Green's bath, sitting room, but you also had Dorothy's room. And And I'm not sure exactly how it worked. It's been disconnected, but I think there was a bell system. There's buttons throughout the house that would have ringed the bell at the top. And then there might have been a system that you could have pushed a button to indicate that you've heard them. Certainly the arrows would have indicated where assistance was needed, either at one of the doors or on the third floor or other parts of the house. Here's a close-up of that dumbwaiter, which is still functional, but it's also been a great way to bring more electricity and water to the upper floors of the house. And then there you can see to the left the back basement stairs, or the back stairs to the second floor. Here's a view of the kitchen. A lot of times when we do the tours, people are like, can we see the kitchen? Because very often that's what they want to see. And of course, there's some modern equipment in there, a warming oven and the gas range. But you can see that it's really largely the same in terms of its cabinets. It has the original hood. There would have been a wood stove below that. And then through the doorway on the left is the pantry. There always would have been a table in the center of the room where we do now have that island. Another fun thing in the basement is the drying racks. This is the laundry room. And so this is essentially a big wooden box that had these racks that would slide out, and you could wash your clothes and linens and other items in the tubs downstairs, and then dry them here, and especially when it's tied into our radiator heating system, so that when it's cold outside, it would be warm and toasty in that box. And then finally, we have the third floor, and these were the servants' quarters. There were 3 bedrooms upstairs. This is a view in the large common area space where there's all kinds of built-in storage. Where we now have a storage is through the doorway that's into a kitchen upstairs, but on the doorways into the eaves, there's more storage space. The third floor alone is 2,800 square feet. And then this large space is the trunk room. And people will often say, well, what's the trunk room? I said, well, it's for your trunks. Imagine that you're traveling around, you're leaving for Europe, you're bringing all those trunks for your clothes. Where are you going to put those trunks? It's not like having a few suitcases. So they need a big space for that. And then, of course, additional built-in storage space on the left and in the cabinet. And that concludes our tour of the mansion. And this was, we one time had the Seattle Sketchers group. These are urban sketchers. And so Gabriele Campanario from the Seattle Times, this is his drawing that he did of the Stimson-Green Mansion. So thank you very much for your time listening. And I don't know, Ginny, were we going to have any questions if people had questions or?
Absolutely, let's do that. So do you want to shut down your PowerPoint and then we can have the full screen where we can see everybody? And,
yes, absolutely. I can stop sharing. Super.
And I put everybody else on mute. So if they want to talk, they're going to have to raise their hand. And then, but this was fabulous. I've gone through it in person, and I'll tell you, it's way easier to sit in a chair and go through it.
Yeah, I think it was a great idea to do it that way. And of course,
giving that history and giving the details. It was lovely. And Jean, I see you have your hand up. So you can unmute yourself, right, Jean? And then.
Unmute.
Good.
Oh, there you go.
I want to know about the bears. How old was Dorothy when she had the bears under her?
I think, as I understand it, she probably would have been about 10 years old. She was fairly young, as I understand it, when she had the bears. But she had dogs, and I said she loved animals. As I said, she had a pony and she had a horse, and we have a trophy here of she was quite a horseman because she won some kind of contest, and so we have a silver trophy with a horse on it that she won in a contest. So it was interesting. The First Hill Improvement Association, the neighborhood group, they had their offices here in one of the bedrooms when the park was being designed, the redesign. And originally, everybody in the neighborhood could put some input, and there was a strong call for having some kind of play structure, but then there was an idea that it wouldn't be large enough. And I'm not sure who came up with the idea of having an art piece, but it was all my tours that they heard me talking about the bears that they decided, and they had a contest for those bears in the park. And Georgia Gerber, who is she's the artist who did the pig at the Pike Place Market and the husky dog at Husky Stadium. She was the artist for that. Elizabeth.
I'm so glad you told us about the bears. I had no idea
I
why
know.
bears were in the park.
I thought they would have put, and I might put a little gorilla plaque up there, or one of those QR codes that you can take a picture with your camera, like they make us do when we go to restaurants these days. But to be able to tell people that story, because there's no information. I mean, it's really cute, but there's a chair and there's two little bears, and basically it's an homage to the history of the neighborhood, and then the history of those two bears living in the house. And as I understand, they lived quite a long time. They went to Woodland Park Zoo, and they were there long enough for Dorothy to take her kids there to see them.
That's great. Well, I had heard a little bit of that story, but much better in your telling, much more detailed than your telling.
Well,
did the sculptor have any consultation with you about choosing a wing chair and that style of a footstool?
Yeah, they were. I remember when they were coming up with the plan, because it was a competition. They did a competition for people to do it, and I know that was they wanted to have something more than just the bears themselves. And we saw original design with just the bears, and it seemed kind of empty, and so they thought it's more interactive and people can climb on it or sit on it, and it seems to be really successful.
I want to remind Horizon House residents that Nancy Olson has written a walking tour from Horizon House where you can visit the mansions on First Hill, and it tells a little bit about the bears. Is that the one that tells about the bears, Nancy, or the one about going to QFC?
Okay, yeah, I'm pretty sure it's the one about the mansions, although it's been a while since I did it, so. But
those are available at the front desk if you wanted to go grab a hold of that. And it also talks about the Catholic house that you talked about too.
The Hophius house, yeah. And as I understand it, I heard a story. I got to do a tour of it a few years ago, but as I understand it, there were restrictions on selling it to Catholics, or I don't know. They basically had to have an intermediary who didn't know that it was for the Archbishop to be able to purchase it. That was the story I heard when we did the tour of that house. And that house is, I don't know if you've been in there, it's beautiful on the inside. They have Tiffany fixtures and leather wallpaper in the dining room, and
I was walking by there with my son on that mansions tour, and he said it looks like a really scary building, Mom.
Yeah, I think nowadays it's I think that's kind of why the Archbishop, it's not very personable in there. Like the whole first floor is for public spaces. There's a nice little church. There's a nice little chapel. The carriage house is actually more cozy. It's been modernized in there. There's a little apartment in there.
So getting back to what we just saw, are there other comments or questions about this? I have to think about which letter to give in that Stimson-Green Mansion.
Yeah.
I had a question.
Yeah.
You said that the property in general on First Hill had been many blocks were just divided, half a block. I have been told that Patsy Bullitt Collins had property right behind and had given that to be used for low-income housing with the restriction that it should not overpower the Stimson-Green Mansion. So the property originally was the full block, or how much did they had?
Yeah, that the half block behind us, where the Cascade Court apartments are now, there would have been houses there. By the 1970s or 80s, it was surface parking, and so they'd all been torn down. And it was owned by Fred Hutchinson Cancer Center. When, I don't know if you remember, they used to be up here on First Hill before they moved to South Lake Union, and they had a number of buildings in the area, and including, if you remember, it was Maynard's Hospital over here where the Jewish retirement home is. And so they Fred Hutchins, I've heard the stories, is they had their building there, and then they would park in the lot, in the surface parking lot. And they had that with the idea that at some point they would be developing a new facility here. And this would have been in like the late 70s, early 80s. But they decided to, instead, they'd have more space down in South Lake Union. So when they put the property up for sale, Patsy purchased it because she wanted to make sure that a 30-story building wouldn't be built there. She also wanted to make sure that there was affordable housing in the neighborhood. Her idea is like, if you have to work in the city, you should be able to live in the city. And so, and then she had some input in the design. So that's why it's only 4 stories. It has the interior courtyard. If you look, the brick first floor is similar to our brick first floor. And then it's not the exterior, like we don't get a back of building here. We have, it's the same on each side. And most importantly, we have parking in that building. So she said, you got to put in more parking. So we have 50 spaces of parking that she used for the events here. And that seems to be less of a need these days because people take Ubers and Lyfts. But we benefit today because we rent out those spaces during the day, during the week to Virginia Mason staff. And so as a nonprofit organization, you can make a good amount of money on a monthly basis from parking. So, but yes, she basically gave the property to at the time it was Housing Resources Group and now known as Bellwether Housing, to develop it. And I think there was a few years between purchasing it and when the building went up. And so she used it as a surface parking lot for her events. And then they've just been great neighbors ever since.
Thank you.
Yeah.
This has
Oh.
been great.
Elizabeth, did you have a question?
Bye.
Oh, you say bye. Yeah. It looks like
Yes.
looks like Gini's trying to multitask here.
Mary, you say something.
You mean me?
Yeah.
Well, I'm not muted at this point.
Yes, that's right.
I've enjoyed it very much, Cathy. You're a very good presenter.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. I like to be in person more because it's, I mean, even if it's doing a slideshow in person, but you guys were a great audience. It's weird to keep talking yourself though. I mean, I usually have more interaction if people are here because you're in the room together, but it seemed to work out.
I thought you might bring up some of the wallpapers that you've hung in the last few years.
Oh yeah, well that's something that it's been quiet the last 2 years with the pandemic, but we have taken advantage of this downtime. We did the whole outside of the building last year with the brickwork. In 2020 we did a lot of interior work, replacing fabric wall coverings that had been there since the 1980s, and so they were looking. Everybody would be like, "Oh, it's so beautiful," and all I could see were where somebody spilled their glass of wine on the wall or something like that. So we were lucky to have an architect who was a consultant, a pro bono consultant for us to help pick out all the new wallpapers, and luckily put us in touch with these wonderful craftsmen that could do the work, because these people don't just do it for everybody, and you don't look them up in the yellow pages. You have to know about them. So we're finally getting the one room that needs to be done. I should unblur my camera so you can see how this is my messy office. And I am in that bedroom. My desk is usually on the other end, but there's boxes, it's full of papers. I've been given a deadline by my coworkers I have till August 12th to clean up my mess. So they're starting to, toss things, or I don't know.
Well, Cathy, again, thank you so much for coming and doing this for us. And it makes us, I think, well, I'll speak for myself. It makes me want to go back there and see the building in person and just enjoy the richness of that building. And we'll post something in our newsletter here so people will know about the walk we're going to take up there. But I think people will really appreciate. They saw those stairs that you'd have to go down to the Turkish room.
Oh yeah. Well, fortunately, there's quite a bit you can see if you can get yourself up into the house. There's so much things that you can see on the first floor that that's for many people that's worth enough for a visit. But yeah, those stairs to the basement are kind of daunting. There is a railing that's built into the woodwork on the side, but yeah, certainly it's a long straight shot down.
So thank you very much. And I'm just going to end this, and I feel,
Okay.
I know Sue can call you and talk to you too. So,
Okay, great. Thank you so much. It's great to see you all, and I really appreciate your time this evening.
well, we appreciate your time. Thank you.
Okay, bye.
Bye.